Hi everyone, this is crowded. Amazing, thanks. So, as Chris said, I'm going to talk about NFTs on Crown platform. It's going to be mostly a non-technical talk. I'm going to try to introduce the importance of NFTs, importance of running them on a stable and decentralized infrastructure. So I'm going to go a bit back and try to see why this makes any sense at all. I would like to ask the audience, have you heard about NFTs before? Who hasn't heard about NFTs before? Don't be shy, it's okay. There's so many weird terms. Could be a coin, it's not, but NFTs, yeah, stands for non-fungible tokens. Have any of you worked on NFTs before? CEO? Okay, so we have quite some veterans. I hope to not disappoint you. I'm mostly going into the cultural background, and we're going to do a small excursion around what institutions are, what institutions mean, and how blockchains serve as institutions. So let's start with that. First, we solved decentralized money. And on Bitcoin, the Bitcoin protocol solves this problem of how we can trade, how we can move, how we can exchange money in a decentralized way without needing mediators, institutions that we delegate our power to, that we trust. So the next logical step is to use these same algorithms and these same infrastructures for additional decentralized services or decentralized interactions between humans for extended registries that do not just have an economic dimension, but also have a social and cultural dimension where we're also trading goods like art, we're trading different things that do not necessarily have to be money itself. So if we look at NFTs, we're at the level of decentralized, collective managed registry. So what are institutions? Institutions are basically the framework that defines the way in which we can interact with each other, in which we can exchange value, in which we also exchange values at a cultural level. So we have cultural institutions, we have social institutions, we have economic institutions, we have banks, we have notaries, we have schools, we have museums, and they mediate because they are the middleman that we use when we transact value or values, and they regulate. And by regulate, I mean that they define the rules by which we can perform these interactions. So on an economic level, in our dear capitalism, what they do is they define ownership structures. They're there to ensure the smooth functioning of capitalism ownership structures and of economic activity. So what happens if we see the blockchain as an institution? First of all, like in Crown, that we can define the rules anew. They're not set in stone. We're not forced to belong to this community, like we're forced to be part of our states. So it's a free will exchange that we can define ourselves. Which rules are we going to use to exchange these values and this value? I think this is an impressive moment in history when we can actually redefine the institutions that we want to belong to. So if we're talking about NFTs, and we're talking about an NFT framework, we're talking about designing new rules for the registration and existence of digital or physical assets. Let's see what the difference is between the institutions we were born into and were forced to belong to, and institutions which we can freely decide to operate on. First of all, as we probably noticed, the institutions that we're born into, they tend to strive towards a monopoly. So there's only going to be one central bank in each country. There's probably just going to be one religion in each country. And we have also taken some of this ideology onto the blockchain, like Bitcoin maximalism shows. So our monotheist societies monocoinist societies, one currency, one state, one religion, one nation, we cannot just leave them behind with some nice and fancy code. We carry them along and we bring them into the blockchain. But we have another option, that of coexistence. So we can go from monocoinist or mono blockchain regimes into a coexistence of several blockchains. And here comes the one dilemma. We have the dream of the Kybernetics, which is to create one global database in which all our information is stored. This is really efficient, and this is a dream for those, especially, who want to control and access data or data. So we go from an invention that was meant to serve privacy and control of own data towards a regime of absolute control because all the information are stored on the same decentralized database. So we can decide, do we want this? Or do we rather want several databases that operate autonomously from each other, but are able to talk and to communicate to each other? Because here, interconnection, interoperability becomes really important. We're talking about atomic swaps. We're talking about NFT protocols that are able to be interchanged or exchanged between, for example, a Bitcoin core blockchain, like the Crown, or an Ethereum-based ERC-721 protocol. So this is what we're working towards achieving. Interconnectivity, but not monopoly. Accessibility, but not total exposure of information on one and only database. No mono database system, right? I think you follow me. So from there, I think we can understand what the importance of NFTs and of registration tools on infrastructures that are open and free is. Crown has been around since 2014, and the community has grown. We have entrepreneurs, we have coders, we have people that are trying to put concepts into code. And these people see Crown as an institution. Why? Because it's the network that hosts their native currency, the Crown coin. It has a governance system through which they can decide and define the rules through which they want this exchange to happen. Remember, institution as a framework. And thus, once a blockchain reaches the status of an institution, even if it's not a globally recognized one, or standardized, or even accepted by, let's say, legal systems, for these people that are using this infrastructure, it works as their home institution. So we created this user story. I'm quoting this from the GitLab repository. As a Crown blockchain user, I want to be able to register and issue a cryptographic token representing a document or another unique asset so that I can prove existence, time registration, and authenticity of that asset at any time. These are the main three functions of the NFTs. Proof of existence, proof of registration, authenticity, which can be projected towards the asset that is registered, or authenticity of ownership. I can prove through my private key that I am the owner of this asset. This is the user story, which has been then developed and has evolved, as we will see. When we designed the platform architecture, the plan was to use OP code to register, unregister, modify assets. We're going to code it as OP. But we soon realized how limited the OP options are. And then the logical evolution of this idea in order to implement it with more flexibility was to work on NFTs, which is at a theoretical level very similar to OP, but at a technical implementation level, more flexible way of registering additional data on the blockchain, as we will see. So the evolution of the ideas that were in the platform design brought us to the use of NFTs inspired by other projects that were also working on this, like Ethereum. So this is the design of the crown architecture. And today we're going to focus on this part. This part is the registry subsystem. It's a crown core functionality that functions through calls. You're executing code directly on the blockchain. And NFTs at this level are special transactions. Not normal transactions where you move coins, but special transactions that allow you to register certain information beyond economic outputs. So we're going to focus on that part, bottom right. And we see that we have different options for the sub-registry system. So we have registrants, we can register titles, we can register IDs, or in a later step, once the core API is working, we can design app services through, for example, web, through the implementation of RESTful API. This is connected to the agent subsystem, but this goes a bit too far to explain the relationship. So we're going to stick to the registration part. So what can we register? We have a digital world, we have a physical world. And I think by now, we should have realized that the digital world is not just a representation of the physical one, it's an extension of it. We're extending reality. With blockchain, we're not mirroring what we already have. We're extending what we have. We don't have any Bitcoins outside of the blockchain, so we're not registering these Bitcoins on the blockchain. They're becoming live inside of it. So it's a good example to see how digitality extends reality and not just mirrors it, like, for example, an online newspaper that just puts the offline articles on a website. That would be a classical example of mirroring what is already physically given. At a physical level, what kind of assets can we register? Well, we can register anything that exists physically and is digitally representable. At this level, we're mirroring. We're mirroring a car, an artwork, a watch, anything that we own and want to register there to prove that we own it. So here, the notary function prevails. It's the institution of the notary. It will give proof of the authenticity and existence and registration of certain assets. But we can also register digital assets. We can register MP3 files. We can register digital copies of artwork. So in digitality, before we have this kind of registration, we only have a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy. That's why if someone takes an MP3 file that I have on my computer, I cannot say that it was theft, because theft involves that I lose my asset. And as it's just a copy of the copy of the copy, it just reproduced. But I am not losing my original MP3 file. This has been a huge argument in the whole music industry and so on. How can discographies, how can labels claim that there's theft going on if these files are just being reproduced. You still have the original CD, Blu-ray, DVD, but it's being copied. So what we're doing at this level with the blockchain is we're modulating regimes of ownership. We're creating new possibilities, new regimes of ownership, and we're making data that was undistinguishable, undiscriminable, making it distinguishable and unique. So if we apply these hashes and register a certain song in MP3 format, for example, if I buy it from an online store, I will get a song with a unique representation, and it will say, this is the copy number 135 of James Morrison's latest hit, right? So if someone takes that copy 135 from me, I won't have that one anymore. I might have 134, 136, but I won't have exactly that copy anymore. Or, in this case, that original, right? Because the copy becomes an original. So this is what we call modulation of regimes of ownership. New forms of ownership of property become possible. I'm not sure we're completely aware what we're doing here, but this is a fact. So we can have new forms like limited ownership. We all know Office 365, right? What happened? Like, I used to buy Office and I owned it my lifetime. Now I own it for a year and then I have to renew it. This is the direction we're taking. So we can have limited time ownership. We can have shared ownership because we have an NFT, an owner, and also an administrator. So I am able to delegate the access to that NFT and the modification of the metadata associated to it. This is not the full list. I'm sure we can come up with other forms of ownership. And this is something that it's at its beginning, and it's taking us on a very interesting and controversial journey. So, enough of this cultural talk. Let's look at the NF token framework on the Crown platform. Crown is the coin, Crown is the informal name, and Crown platform is the sum of the functionalities that we're building on top of a blockchain that go beyond the, let's say, token dimension or the coin dimension. We have different NF token variables. So for example, we have the token ID and the protocol ID. Together, these two attributes combined are the unique representation of whatever asset we're trying to register. So at a protocol ID level, we will create a category that would, for example, include all documents that are going to be registered on the blockchain. So you could have documents, you could have, again, cars, you could have artwork, you could have different types of NFs, right? And then the token ID is the concrete document that we're uploading. So it will be, in my case, for example, birth certificate, Jose, right? And these two attributes together will give the unique identifier and will prove the authenticity of this NF. What else do we have? We have the token owner ID. This has been a missing link. Okay, I can timestamp something on the Bitcoin blockchain, but how do I prove its ownership? If someone gets hold of this digital copy, he will have the exact same hash I have. So we are going into a dispute. And who is the true owner of that document? We don't have a solution to that, except for if we vinculate it to a private key, which is the ultimate way of identification on the blockchain. Your keys, your coins, right? So it applies. And this is where it gets a bit more interesting. We have the metadata. Metadata can be plain text, can be JSON, can be binary, and it allows for a bit more input than a regular OP would allow for. So here you can, for example, introduce a geolocation, or you can introduce information about the administration of this token, the nature of the token, a brief description of what this registration is about, this representation is about. So all these together, protocol ID, token ID, owner ID, and admin ID, and metadata, combined are the basic structure of the NF framework that we're trying to build. This is, as I said at the beginning, not set in stone. We're just building the institution now, and we're inviting everyone who thinks that this can be useful for him or her or them to come along and say, hey, why don't you introduce an additional field of data where I can, for example, make visible other attributes that are not contained in this scarce list. And we'll say, all right, that sounds great, let's do it. So we're really looking for people who want to capitalize on this and work with us to further design this framework. These are the variables. And then we have the protocol. So we have token protocol ID, token protocol name, token metadata, schema URI. This is the information, this links, so to say, to the information that explains how to read the metadata. So it will link to an explanation of how to encrypt, or to read, or to make it readable for a human being, let's say, if it's not in plain text. So this is the framework that is already running tests, and our idea is to deploy this in a testnet first and find a few pilots that want to work together with us to see how we can improve the system. And I want to show a short demonstration of how an NF token can be registered on the Crown blockchain. This is a Q&A that we recorded recently on YouTube, shortly before we released the last version. And yeah, we're talking for like 1.5 hours about proof of stake, about NFTs. And in this sequence, Artem, our lead developer, is going to do a demonstration of an NF token registration on the blockchain. So let's have a go at it.
And this is kind of the simplicity compared to like Ethereum NFT, where you need to implement a business logic. Here, you just need to type the parameters and you're done. Right now, the protocols are not implemented yet, but we can use any names of them in order to register just simple transactions. So like before that, I also need to generate a new address, which is going to be the owner of this document, basically, or NFT in this case. So I'm generating a new address, and now I'm writing down NF token register doc. Right now, I need to type an identifier. In the case of document, it's just a SHA-256 of this document, or like any text, basically. So just gonna stop sharing this screen, and I'm gonna share my
There were a lot of people in the Q&A.
browser window, so you can see what I am timestamping and registering. All right. So this is a hash generator. Later, I think we just can use built-in generator in Crown wallet. Right now, I'm just gonna write down, let's say, I claim that Bitcoin will cost $25,000 in 2020, right? So I make this prediction. Let's think about it as a document or prediction or idea. It can be anything, because the simplest use case for these NFTs is timestamping something, but also including different properties and including ownership of this asset, in this case, a timestamped document, all right? So I'm calculating just this hash. Okay, I'm copying it. Going back to the wallet. Type in the hash. Type in the address. And it can also contain additional metadata.
Sorry, I will make it a bit smaller so that we can see that.
Data information that I'm not going to include right now. So press enter. Now you can see the transaction is sent to the network. You paid the fee for sending this transaction. And right now it's in the mempool. So we need to wait at least one block until the transaction is added to the blockchain. And after this, we'll be able to list transactions, NFT transactions that are in the blockchain. For this, we can use command NF token list. And now it doesn't show anything because the new block is not added yet. It can be only seen after it's in the chain already. So we're just gonna wait for block number 6963.
The address, that's how you...
Yes, correct.
Correct.
Because if you think about the timestamping mechanism in Bitcoin, where you can use like a burning transaction, you're pretty limited in what you can do with it. You just have 40 bytes. You can put some hash in there, and you can use another 8 bytes in order to put metadata in there. And here it's a totally different approach. Here, timestamping of a hash of a document is the simplest use case. It's just a simple thing you can do with it. And already here you can have additional metadata. You can have a specific index for NFTs to make it faster, retrieval faster. And you can have ownership here. And later you'll be able to also transfer them between different people and between different addresses, let's say, etc. So we already have this like additional nodes. So I'm just gonna write down NF token list. It shows us the transaction ID, which is the same as this one. And in order to have extended information, you just add the last parameter as true, which means verbose, and you can see the block hash, the registration transaction hash, the height of registration, the timestamp, which is today, like 3 minutes ago, the identifier of this protocol, the ID itself, and 2 addresses, the owner address, and the second is admin address, which is additional parameter that can be used to change metadata without signature of the owner if you want to delegate administration of your assets to another party.
Amazing.
So
I think we can leave it at that. And now we welcome discussion and questions. So we have enough time to talk a bit about it. And thank you very much for listening.
All right then. We've got a little bit of time if anyone's got any questions. All right, Ray, let me just bring the microphone to you. Huh? There it is.
So I was working with some friends back down my way not so long ago, and I've been trying to find ways to introduce them all to blockchain, etc. And there is actually a Crown-based service out there already. I can't remember. It's something.nz. And it records, it allows you to upload and record your services, your documents and that already, and timestamp them into the Crown platform.
Yeah.
And the question simply is, can you help me remember what the hell that program's called? Because I can't.
It's the Busy Man timestamping tool.
That's the one. Thank you very much.
busyman.cz.
Beautiful.
Thanks for
That's as valid a question as any.
Much
Got your
appreciated.
answer, right? Anyone else got a question? Jose?
Artem is also here. He's the designer of the framework, so you can also go into more technical details, and he'll be happy to answer
Is that
them.
point him out? Point him out.
Artem?
Artem, right there. Big Artem. Okay, there you go. Technical man on. Oh, there we go. The one that's bubbled right up. There you go.
It's more of a kind of thought than a question, but I'm going to go with it and we're going to see where we end up. So, I think it's really interesting, the ability to utilize blockchain as a method for proof of ownership of content. For example, if you buy a DVD or whatever to avoid piracy, copyright, etc. However, that is more of a mainstream, more of a mainstream how you should live kind of way. Whereas in this scene, we're all about open source, we're all about torrents, we're all about fuck those guys. So what's your kind of thought on that in terms of how do you stop the people that use blockchain to avoid piracy as being dicks to everybody else?
Well, that's a really good question. No, that's a really good comment, and that's why I wanted to point out that we might not be aware about what regimes of ownership we're fabricating here, because that was kind of the liberty we had on the internet, right? This indiscriminable copies of copies of copies that we can just multiply and share, and I have brought culture to places, cultural products to places where people couldn't afford to buy DVDs or whatever. So this has been an explosion of shared culture, right, and of open culture and free culture. So as we know, blockchain has both in it. It has the control, it has the emancipation. So it's all about figuring out what kinds of tools we're going to build on these possibilities, and we'll probably see both. So on one side, it's a way to protect the artists and the producers of culture so that they get rewarded for their work. On the other side, it's no doubt also a tool of control, as we're increasingly understanding, right? So that's a really important aspect that I wanted to point out through explaining that we might end up having one global database that is capturing all our data and that we cannot escape anymore, which is a dream for many controlling agents, right? So it depends what we do out of it, and that's why I'm inviting you all to keep designing this further in order to make it more inclusive, open, and in the sense of what you mentioned there. Right? Thanks, Chris.
Hey, I just wanted to come back on that. Actually, I thought it was an interesting question because traditional efforts to manage and maintain control of produced rights, digital assets, has ordinarily come from the side of the producer, right? So we've talked about things like you can think about things like DRM, and you can think about things like region-restricted access for DVDs, or or whatever it is you want to think about. But one of the things that's really interesting about what Crown's doing here and now is when you start to think about the access control mechanism as a decentralized function within society, and then you couple that with the decentralization, if you like, the democratization not only of consumption but of production. So The obvious and easy example, not a brilliant example, but the obvious example is something like YouTube, where anybody can become, any consumer can also be a producer of content. And the idea that that we can have a flexible and decentralized solution, which is something akin to kind of more power and more complexity, more sophisticated approaches to licensing or to granting access or to distribution, which isn't essentially an open source, but equally isn't something that is like centralized and control based. So you can create new forms of licensing methods, and in fact, any producer with access to a content distribution platform could also now using this model distribute their own form of licensing, and that license can be kind of to some degree I would anticipate will also end up being unique to them. So they can say, well, you can copy it and use it for 3 days. You can copy it, use it for 5 days. You can listen to it 3 times. You can watch the movie once. You can watch 30% of the movie. You can share it with 3 friends, and all of that can be kind of built into the mechanism. This principle is much more about democratizing the licensing model, which is the kind of unanswered question, the unsolved problem in the in the equation so far. Is that a
Sure. Do you want to pick up on that, or?
No, it's cool.
Cool.
Wait for it.
Yeah.
You good?
Just to add something really short to the discussion, in the metadata, or even in the URI, if you're registering an NF token to prove, let's say, authorship over, for example, a song, to keep the example, you can also publish what license you're releasing that song under, right? You could publish it under Creative Commons and make the file available through IPFS. But the world will still know that it's your song, and you can still claim that it's your song, because we know you can have copyright and Creative Commons on something, or MIT, right? So there is a lot of room to play and to still make available this stuff without losing authorship.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's a fight between credibility and ownership versus the sharing economy.
Yeah, and it's the borders are really fluid.
What good is maintaining the ability to verify yourself as the author if you can't enforce it? So what I mean is, like, speaker, play the song, microphone to speaker, piracy, copy it. So there is no digital protection in that regard. You know what I mean? Like we were talking about earlier on, if you're in a particularly locked down ecosystem like Fortnite, then the items can't leave that realm, right? So you can't pirate the stuff in there because it's controlled. But in open systems and with images and music, even particular, yeah, fine, I can verify I'm the author, but it's still no stopping the piracy.
Not stopping the playback, let's say, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So yes, you're not going to be able to control the playback, just like with the current file sharing economy. If I have the file on MP3 and I have flash drive, I will just play it. But the author doesn't have just this economic incentive for being author, getting paid every time it's reproduced. It's also about claiming authorship to say, I am the creator of this. You can use it, but I am the creator and you will give me credit, which is really similar to the Creative Commons
That's
framework.
a different kind of value than monetary value.
Exactly, it's cultural value.
That's what I was looking for. That's actually, yeah. So you mean, I guess we're into that realm now where value isn't just monetary, and we're having to think about these things.
Yeah.
Because
we
of our
tend to
open
forget.
systems and so on. Excellent. That was excellent. So, any more? Here we go. Whatever here. I was going to shoot it down then.
Hiya. It puts a lot of onus on the author as being the sole supplier of works. Like, in the ideal world, that's true, but there's often a chain that would then package what the author does, present it, market it. It's an entire operation. Like if you were to take a celebrity, they don't work in a bubble on their own. They have a small industry behind them that put them into celebrity status. So how do those people get rewarded that are also part of this chain?
That's a really good question. So the examples that I'm witnessing now, also thinking beyond Crown, for example, Creary, which is this content network that is trying to build a blockchain-based YouTube, so to say. You don't have a gallerist anymore. You don't have the curator anymore. So it's the author that is directly in front of its audience. And on one side, it gives him the possibility to capitalize his work more. On the other side, he's more unprotected because this industry, okay, it drains part of the profits, but it also protects the authors. So we have to think more about that to figure out what the consequences will be. But what we're witnessing for now is that these platforms enable the authors or producers of cultural goods, let's say, to directly reach an audience. And these mediators that were there, gallerist, curator, PR agency, they're suddenly algorithmic. And the new center is the blockchain platform. So they are actually doing part of the functions that, for example, the label was performing, and they're being rewarded because they're the same people that are securing the network. So they'll be rewarded in the form of transaction fees, or they'll be rewarded through the use of the platform, which at the same time will increase the value of the ecosystem. This is the answer I can give for now, but it's definitely a topic to develop on and think further.
This is where we're at right now, isn't it? We're trying to work this stuff out. You know, we're working on it actively, that kind of these new problems, right?
Yeah, definitely.
So cool, right? We're going to have to set up the panel discussion now, so we've got to get the stools out and everything. But one more round of applause for Jose.
Thank you.